all races are equal before God. Not one race is more superior than others, but those working hard should be rewarded with opportunities, no matter they are Black, white, brown, or yellow. I'm grateful for the opportunities given to me when I worked hard, no matter how difficult my family situations were. Exam is a color-blind standard to evaluate students' progress and academic achievements. That's why exams still exist for BPS every week almost, even under remote situation. As Mr. James asked, GPA from different school and different class could hold different standards. As the
and you're past your time.
Okay. So, but with all this said, I think I really beg you to delay the voting, and especially all of you are so tired. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speakers are Jennifer Hu, Yun Shen, Ling Shen Dong, and Michelle Donovan. If you could please raise your hands virtually. Ms. Hu?
That was like Shania, Shanae, and Boo Boo, and David, right?
Ms. Hu? Okay, Yun Shen. Ling Shendong. Ling Shen.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ling Shendong, and I have two daughters attending Boston Public School. I feel very upset about the proposal to cancel exams and hope you can vote to keep the exam. Exam is not perfect, but at least offer a reasonable way to measure academic achievement among students. Exam can make sure highly qualified students get the opportunity to attend 3 exam schools. Without exam, there's no practical way to compare students from different schools with different grading system. The 3 exam schools are the only good ones among so many BPS schools. Please don't destroy them. Please leave our kids some hope to work for. Instead of cancel the exams for the exam schools, I would highly suggest you guys to expand the school exam requirement to all Boston public schools. That will dramatically increase the quality of the BPS system. If in-person exam is not safe, we should consider online exam. You have to trust our students. They are honest and they will not cheat. Thank you very much for your consideration. Good night.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Michelle Donovan. Michelle? Michelle?
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Welcome.
Hello. I am the mother of 4 BPS students, including a 6th grader, and I am a member of the BLS class of 1995. I'm also the first in my family to also go to college. 13 days is not enough time for parents and leaders to analyze what little information the working group has provided. The working group, charged to find an equitable way to admit kids for 1 year, has massively overstepped and altered the entire selection criteria with little to no input from highly impacted communities. The school committee and superintendent should not push through such a massive overhaul based on information presented in a single PowerPoint. The working group has not been transparent and clear in how they plan to determine a student's GPA for ranking purposes. There is no grade equity across BPS schools, let alone between BPS and private schools. At recent working group meetings, Ms. Sullivan responded to these concerns by pointing out that these problems have always existed. But now the stakes are higher because BPS would not be using a standardized test to determine 50% of that ranking. Without district-wide normed process grading and multi-organizational normed grading processes in place, BPS's ranking system is rendered essentially meaningless. BPS made serious errors in the ranking process last year when, let's face it, things were far less complicated. Sorry. The working group's proposal to use zip codes to allocate 80% of the seats also deserves more analysis. We as parents have began to analyze the data that BPS provided just yesterday at the final hour. A friend's calculations suggest that BPS should use their already established zones in allocating these 80% of seats. This would be far more equitable for use here. She had begun to run those numbers over the weekend, and a few of us posed similar questions.
Donovan, you're past your time. Thank you, Ms. Donovan. And I'm sorry, I wanted to interrupt and just apologize. I had my mic on earlier while I was talking to somebody in the room with me, and I'm sorry if anyone misinterpreted any of the comments that I made. I was talking about a children's book. I apologize for that. Ms. Sullivan.
Thank you. Our next group of speakers is David Garlow, Doug Miller, Yamaris Matias, and Joshua Acevedo. Is David Garlow with us? Okay, Doug Miller. Yamaris Matias.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Imaris Matias, a parent mentor at San Stephen and a mother of the fifth grader at the Ocean Garden KA Pilot School. I'm here today to give you my opinion why I'm against of the NCAS exam. Also, my personal experience with this exam. As an immigrant, I know the difficulties I went through when I came to this country with the different culture, language, and education system was a big challenge for me. When I came to my education, I was one of the many students who didn't get a high school diploma back in 2003, even though I passed all my classes with decent grades. Just because I couldn't make that extra point. I don't think it was fair because more than the 40% of these exams is not even covered by the teachers at school. I don't know who the people in charge of these exams are, but I think they should be teachers who are teaching our kids during the school year. In closing, I think about how difficult it is for children and the amount of stress they are with this pandemic crisis. They deserve compassion, sympathy, and respect. Do not make them take these NCAS exams, and hope you all consider the proposal tonight. Every kid deserves quality. Please be safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next group of speakers are Joshua Acevedo, Stuart Wang, Noah Tohami, and Michelle Sathan. Joshua?
All right,
you
can you
with
hear me?
us? Yes, I can.
Great, thank you. All right, so let's see. Despite comments from the working group and other speakers tonight, it remains my belief that BLS, BLA, and O'Brien remain exam schools. While I support the recommendations of this working group to admit rising 4th and 5th graders into the Summer Boston Exam Initiative, it was not the purpose or task of this working group, as far as I was made aware, to make this into a historical moment, as that would suggest an ongoing change, but rather to present a one-year plan due to the current COVID crisis. I want to start by asking that the working group release their data and the simulations with results that they ran, as they are confusing and seemingly questionable. Using basic math in the chart referencing allocation by zip code, it is not difficult to deduct that should 150 tie with a perfect GPA and choose BLS first, then only roughly 80 will get in based off the 20% allocation. And for the other 70, depending on zip code, may not get in, as some zip codes through all 10 rounds receive as low as 2 to 3 total seats at all schools combined. This is, questionable because the lady at the beginning, mentioned how if there was a tie of 100, they would all get in if that was their first choice. And that was the reason why they didn't need a pool. That is very questionable. And honestly, like, that's not accurate. I'd like to see those simulations. I'd like to see this data. So, but to continue, I would also request that parents be sent their child's ranking by straight GPA and the ranking by GPA within the various zip codes after the pool is found, so that parents and students can use this information when ranking their exam school selections. Because based off the 20%, 80% allocation, you could be literally 85th by GPA, but not gain a seat if everybody, including yourself, listed BLS first. Depending on that zip code, you will not get a slot. So if you do not know that you're 85th and you choose BLS first, you might miss out on BLA and O'Brien because of that decision. That's unacceptable. I would think that the school board would find that unacceptable as well. These simulations, everything that they're saying, I'd like to see the data. I also question, like a few before me, why total K-8 numbers were used in calculating the zip codes allocations, not just the total number of current 6th grade and 8th grade student numbers by zip code. Thank you. Please delay this vote. Look at this data yourself. Please judge for yourself and send the data to us. Let us look at this, because I question why not a single 6th grade parent was on this group.
Thank you, Mr. Acevedo.
Thank you.
Our next group of speakers are Stuart Wang, Noah Tahami, Michelle Sathan, Joseph Brush, and Yukong Zhao. If you could please raise your hands virtually. Stuart Wang with us? Okay. Noah Tahami. Michelle Sathan. Michelle?
Yes.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm speaking as a parent, yes, grade 6 teacher at the Lilla G. Frederick Pilot Middle School. My son Jude spoke earlier, and as a parent, I must elevate his voice. As stated at the Monday 5 p.m. meeting by the exam school working force, grading is not normed across the district. Some schools, like the Boston Teachers Union School, grades lower in the fall and the winter to show growth in the spring. Including the low fall term grades only highlights the drop in grades during the summer that occur in many of our communities. Furthermore, historically, a final grades has been a part of the parameter for the GPA. To decrease the effects of grade inflation and deflation, please consider the grade 4 final grades and the grade 5 winter grades as a parameter for the applicant pool. We all know that the 4-to-1 grading is not equivalent to the A to F. I've also waited over 7 hours to speak. Students and families deserve other forums to speak. Please don't rush this vote.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Joseph Brech.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you guys for
Sir, you're on mute. Looks like he fell off. Ms. Sullivan, will you call the next speaker, please?
Sure. Our next speakers are Yukong Zhao, followed by Natalie Trong and Jose Valenzuela.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Welcome.
Hi, good evening. My name is Yukong Zhao. I'm president of the Asian American Coalition for Education, representing more than 200 organizations nationwide. I urge all of you to recheck the unlawful, unconstitutional recommendation proposed by the working group, because the proposed change to the admission system of Boston exam schools are racially motivated. From the documents, it disclosed they adopt called the BPS racial equity planning tool in order to achieve racial equity or racial quotas in order to, reflect the racial mix of Boston City. That is problematic. The proposed change are unlawful because they violate the Massachusetts Constitutional Amendment Article CXI. which stipulates no student should be assigned to or denied admittance to a public school on the basis of race, color, national origin, or creed. They also violate the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution and the Title VI of 1964 Civil Rights Act. As a national civil rights organization, we support the enhancement of the racial diversity in our nation's elite schools, but this need to be done lawful way. You need, correct your failure in the many Latino and Black community. I heard the last meeting you mentioned, many fourth grade students cannot read. So that is a shame. You need to fix that. And instead of using Asian American as a scapegoat for your policy failure. So please vote no on this unlawful recommendation. I also want to advise many Black and Hispanic, friends, we support your better education, but you need to hold the public official, like the mayor, like the superintendent, accountable, because it is them failure, not as a test. I also want to give you my personal experience. I grew up from poverty, but I want to tell you a solid academic foundation is very important for your children to get upward mobility. You need hold the public officials accountable, and that is the right way to go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dell.
Our next group of speakers are Natalie Trong, Jose Valenzuela, Jody Sen, Grace Sue, and Angelina Camacho. Is Ms. Trong with us? Okay. Jose Valenzuela.
And Ms. Sullivan, as the next speakers are joining us, we have just about 20 speakers to go for fellow members' awareness and for the viewing public. Please proceed, Mr. Valenzuela, if you joined us.
Yep, I'm here. Good evening. My name is Jose Valenzuela. I'm speaking to you as a BPS parent, a BPS teacher, and a BPS alum. I'm a graduate of Boston Latin School and currently a history teacher at Boston Latin Academy. I've seen firsthand the harm these exams have done to our school district, and it's beyond time to adopt a different admissions process that does not require an exam. I entered BLS in 1996-97, the last year under the old quota system. After the federal courts ruled this unconstitutional, BLS underwent its most dramatic change in decades. When I entered, 1 in 3 seats were occupied by Black and Latinx students like me. But when I exited 6 years later, that number had been cut in half to 1 in 6. I'm one of the lucky ones because I graduated. I used the opportunities at BLS to achieve the success we hope for all of our young people. And in 2019, I went from one of the kids who was taunted for being one of the quota kids to being recognized as the BLS Outstanding Young Graduate, the first and only Latinx alum to be given such an award in the 385-year history of Boston Latin School. We should not have to wait another 385 years to award the next Latinx alum a similar award. In addition, the exams have perpetuated the myth that only those who have scored well in the exam are prepared to succeed at BLS, BLA, and O'Brien, which is not supported by the data. As a teacher of 7th graders at Boston Latin Academy for the last 5 years, I can tell you unequivocally that the exam is not a valid measure of success in an exam school. It is my job as an educator to meet my students where they are, scaffold their learning for them, and to prepare them for the next grade level and beyond. The working group has identified other metrics like GPA that may more closely align with future success. We should no longer stay tethered to the antiquated idea of sink or swim. No matter how a student is admitted to the exam schools, we should support all students to graduate, not just those with the most means. So I urge you to adopt the working group's proposal, and I hope we don't squander this opportunity for change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Valenzuela.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jody Sen.
Hi, good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
I'm Jody Sen. I'm living in Charlestown. I have two children in JQS school. Tonight I know everybody's very tired until now. But a lot of Chinese people, Chinese parents, they already say they don't support this, like cancel the testing for this free testing school. I'm agree with them. And I just want to say one story about my parents, my Chinese family. Like some of the, like my family, actually, we actually have a chance to get our own house in somewhere else out of the Boston. But we want to stay here because we think these three schools are really good school. I really want my children can go to these three schools. And we want them to go to this school, and then we try very hard. I know if the children can go to the good school, and I believe they can have a better future than others. So that's why we really want to like stay this. I believe this system, the current system, are the best system for the children. They can have like fair chance to have their chance to get in the school. Thank you. I didn't prepare. I just say something real to everybody.
Thank you, Ms. Sen. Our next speaker is Grace Sue.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi, good evening. My name is Grace Sue, and I am a social worker from the Boston Chinatown Neighborhood Center. I'm speaking on behalf of my organization tonight. BCNC stands for Racial and Socioeconomic Diversity, Equity to Access, and Affirmative Action. We appreciate the thoughts and efforts that the working group has put into the drafting of this proposal for exam schools admission criteria for the school year 21 to 22, as well as BPS responsiveness to ensuring the safety of our students and their families during this pandemic. There are two concerns that we would like to address with the current proposal that we hope BPS would consider moving forward. First, median household income by zip code does not reflect the accurate condition of individual families who live within the same zip code. We need to recognize the reality of gentrification in areas such as Chinatown and South End and the impact that it has on our families. Students of low-income families live on the same and neighboring streets from their high-income neighbors. Therefore, the overall median household income based on the zip code gives a false depiction of how well all families are doing socioeconomically who live under the same zip code. To address socioeconomic diversity and equity to access as prioritized by the exam school's admission proposal, we should consider individual household income over the median household income by zip code. Secondly, stakeholder engagement. The stakeholder engagement process needs to intentionally include the voice of all stakeholders, but especially educators, parents, and students by whom this implementation will directly affect. Their voices need to be included in the conversations and planning process going forward. And ample time should be provided to the community members to review proposal material and to provide feedback.
Ms. Sue. Yes, thank you, Ms. Sue.
Okay. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next group of speakers are Angela Camacho, Trevor Finland, Christina Colante, and Jerly Shear Butler.
Ooh, let's see if we can do this. All right. Thank you to all the thought leaders who have convened on this issue. I know this is hard and you're trying to find the best solution for our children. As you know, I try to advocate fairly on the areas that impact our children. If we must suspend this exam as a COVID response, please commit to only 1 year with the support needed for our students. As a graduate of BLS and the mother of a new tiger at the O'Brien, my family is not rich or uniquely privileged. My Latino immigrant father had to be convinced to let me test then. And now exam schools, along with the few IB schools and the Munis Academy, are the leading pre-collegiate choices for many of us to have a fighting chance because of the same inequities we talk about every day, that lump Black with brown without seeing the true needs in that spectrum. The selection formula will not give more diverse students their first choice compared to the current process, nor solve the diversity issue on its own long term. Further, the zip code counts are flawed based on Boston's hidden poverty and development's affordable set-asides, further marginalizing our most vulnerable and yet talented students. More equity needs to be done beyond the test. Students that get any choice will be placed in a system that they may not be prepared for, because we know it's more than being smart, but having the resources to remain from years of preparation before the exam. I'm concerned about the vague mention of supports needed for their success, because a relaxed entry process must be paired with tools to thrive at those schools that will not relax the academic rigor. Without the strong commitment to that part of the plan, we're simply increasing the potential for dropouts or delayed graduation, which works against our city's commitment to equity, because we know that any educational delay affects the economic mobility of families. We should return to the test, but also focus on the areas that will make all students more competitive. Let's focus on the real feeder issues, not schools, like quality universal pre-K, baseline readiness by 3rd grade, universal AWC availability, ESI efforts in the 4th grade, universal high school improvements, deepening our cultural awareness, and access for all ELL students. That will create a scenario where the test will not be the problem, but picking the best school will be, because we can have equity even with the exam schools in place. There will be tests for all life's path, all of our students' life's paths for world-class learners. Let's not place the wrong focus on this testing standard. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Camacho.
Camacho. Our next group of speakers are Trevor Fendlin, Christina Colante, Jerly Shara Butler, and Trupti Banda. Is Trevor with us? Okay. Christina Colante. Jerly Shara Butler. Trupti Banta. Fiona Mahoney. Carrie Weisschrab. Ruth Gonzalez Vega.
Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Hi, my name is Ruth Gonzalez Vega, and I am a parent to 2 kids in the BPS system. COVID has impacted across the whole city. While some areas more than others, no zip code has been left untouched by this pandemic, and the true victims are our children. I don't think you will find anyone who doesn't agree that the previous admission systems for entrance to the exam schools needed an overhaul. I never understood why 50% of the required criteria came from an exam that did not reflect the BPS curriculum. My understanding was that the MAP test was a suitable solution. Now you are proposing entrance to an exam school with no examination, and have admitted already numerous times that you anticipate to see candidates tie when they ranked by GPA alone, thereby turning the admissions process into a game of chance. I'm not here to say that change is not necessary. I'm here to say, come up with a proposal that tackles change with an impact on equality and diversity that is more transparent and unbiased. Go into all Boston communities, speak to families, and generate more dialogue that is constructive. This has been missing throughout this process, and it is overshadowing the real issue here, which is, in my opinion, a poorly funded and administered education system that does not meet the basic requirements of our elementary school students. And Mr. Michael Aconti, I would really like to know the name of that book that you were quoting earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vega.
Thank you.
Our next speakers are Marina Melidonis and Donna Wells.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Marina Melidonis. I am chair of the governing board of the Baldwin, and I have served in a committee since March on the closing and reopening of one of our Boston universities. I am here on behalf of my children, ages 7 and 4, on behalf of parents at the Baldwin, Edison, and Winship, and other concerned parents across the city, and the teachers whose views are not represented by BTU. I debated coming today and staying on this call since 5, knowing full well my words would fall on deaf ears. I am angry when I hear that decisions are being made with our children in mind and guided by public health. That is not true. Back channel negotiations, city politics, and union disputes are driving decision-making. I'm here to share my disappointment with BTU, this committee, the superintendent, and with Mayor Walsh. No one is putting our children first, so please stop saying it is so. The decision today to keep schools closed is criminal. True intentions are hidden behind public health concerns. The positivity rate in the city of Boston is 0.7%, but yet we are shutting down our schools. It was misleading for Chief Martinez to reference a 5.7% rate. That is a week-to-week rise. It is not the overall positivity rate of the city. If public health is your concern, then shut down the city, not just the schools. This situation is creating the greatest inequity across Boston. Parents that can afford to do so are pulling their kids out of BPS and enrolling in private schools. If they can afford to do so, they are hiring help in the home. So in the end, who is suffering? The vulnerable. Children with minimal support at home, families with little financial means. These families and children need schools open. If your desire is to maintain the equity, open the schools. Look across the country, New York, San Diego, New Jersey, they have opened. I am at a loss. I cannot stand by and watch what is happening. Opening the school should be your #1 priority. I am here for the sake of my children. I am here to stand for the thousands of children across the city that have no vote. This virus is not going away, and you are failing 60,000 children. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Donna Wells. Ms. Wells?
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I just wanted to start with saying thank you very much for all the wonderful ideas tonight. There were some profound observations, and it has truly been a moving 7 hours. I do not agree with this proposal, but most of my ideas have already been up. Most of my issues have already been passionately talked about. The two issues I do want to bring up though is the MAP test. We were told by the district the MAP test was equitable, but I've been told tonight that the MAP test and no test is equitable. If that's true, why have we not been having this conversation for our current 6th graders since then? That would have given us 7 months. The other thing I heard was this plan is for 1 year, but that's not true. 6th graders will be in school at BPS for 6 years. 8th graders will be in school for 4 years. I heard tonight that the SAT was implemented and was given at the high schools because BPS thought that was important for them for college. When is BPS going to think that their current students, the students that will be in their middle school and high school, will be just as important? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wells. Our next group of speakers is Jamie Dutton, David Giordano, Nancy Horowitz, Shantai Elves, and Dima Barash. Jamie Dutton.
I'm sorry, Ms. Sullivan. Your voice was a bit garbled. Was that Jamie Dutton?
Yes, Dutton, D-U-T-T-O-N. followed by David Giordano. Nancy Horowitz. Shantai Alves. Dima Barash. Yvette Phillip. Yvette.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Yvette Phillip. I was born and raised in Boston and attended school within the Boston public school system. My belief is that the work needed within BPS should not only center the 3 exam schools, but all schools within the district. As someone who wants to raise a family in the city of Boston, I hope that all schools in the city will be a viable choice from kindergarten to 12th grade. This means that all schools in the areas of Boston across racial and social economic lines need to have equitable resources that provide quality education to all students. It concerns me that the committee members were shocked by the academic detail provided by the working group, page 13. I suggest that this form of academic data be reviewed by the committee more often, more frequently. It is unfortunate that it took a pandemic to get to this place. A working group similar to the exam school admissions working group should continue to exist even after this decision to push Boston to have a more equitable experience for all children in the city from kindergarten to 12th grade. This proposal by the working group is the right thing to do and a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Phillip. Our final speaker is Roxy Harvey.
Thank you. My name is Roxy Harvey, and I'm a parent, a Dorchester resident, and the SpedPAC chair. I want to first thank the other parent, I believe was Jamie, who waited over 7 hours to speak up on behalf of high needs students, and also to our superintendent for committing to providing a specific plan for in-person services to our high needs students so that they will not be left without anything. As you know, there are students that need in-person services for their overall well-being, and their families chose in-person services for them because there were no other options. I equate it to if a hospital closed, we wouldn't stop providing necessary medical care. It is extremely difficult to continue to see parochial schools, community centers, and pods having access to in-person locations for remote learning outside of school buildings in Boston. But high needs students cannot get essential in-person services effective tomorrow. The Boys and Girls Clubs, YMCAs, and the pods have a lot more than the 1 to 10 students that were in the BPS buildings. Our 1,300 students in each cohort are back to dire circumstances and left without services and supports. Our students who cannot access remote learning are not 100% remote. They are without schooling and services. We need a clear, specific plan to service students with high needs that cannot access remote learning, even when all BPS buildings are closed. Kindergarten through 12th grade students are not the ones that are raising the COVID-19 citywide rate. We must make changes in our city that allow the rate to lower while providing the option for safe in-person learning opportunities and services to students with high needs. I want to be clear that there should have already been a plan for high needs students in the event that all BPS buildings had to close. The ideas for using contractors for in-person home services, social workers, alternative safe locations, or different placements need to be properly flushed out based on the eye for individualized in the IEP. Families of high needs students need to know their options now. SpedPAC's position on in-person learning, as stated in our October 13th letter to the court, has not changed. We will continue to advocate for the option for in-person services for students with the highest needs. As stated in our letter, without in-person services, many of these students become dysregulated and spend more time in crisis in homes that are not set up with all the support staff and wraparound care that schools have available to help them stay out of emergency rooms. We knew the rates were going to rise, especially as we approach winter. There should have already been a plan for this scenario. SpedPAC, Beja, and other community partners have been advocating for these alternative plans to be able to provide safe in-person services for students with high needs and that need assessments. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Harvey. Mr. Locondo, that concludes our speakers for public comment.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. And I first want to say thank you once again to all of our public commenters this evening. We ended up having, I believe, 179. A few people dropped off over time, but I think it fell down to, somewhere at least above 150. So, I just want to take a moment, and I think we all do as a committee, to first thank everyone for first showing up and sharing your thoughts with us, and second, being considerate of your fellow speakers and sticking to time, because we were appreciative that we could get through all of that time and still be able to conduct our business this evening. And we know this is a tough issue. We heard a lot of people tonight on both sides of the coin. And so I think it's important for folks to have a forum and be able to be heard. I do want to take a moment again and just say, I'm sorry if I was a distraction earlier. I wasn't intending to offend anyone. My comments were taken out of context and not intended to reference anything in this meeting. And so if anyone took offense to that, I'm mortified and I'm terribly sorry. I've received a number of texts from folks alerting me to what was heard. And I'm deeply sorry. I don't want to be a distraction here, and that's embarrassing for me, and I'm sorry. So I'd like to move on. I hope folks will accept that as well. So let's move on now to our action items this evening. We're going to go a little bit out of order through the action items because I'd like to get everything else out of the way before we return to the discussion about the exam school item that's before us. So let's start first with the grants for approval, which are totaling $1,405,953. I'll open it up now to any questions or comments from the committee. Well, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve those grants as presented.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill.
Second.
It's a second from Ms. Robinson. Thank you. Any discussion or objection to the motion? Hearing none, Ms. Sullivan, will you please call the roll?
Dr. Coleman,
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Dr. Rivera,
Yes.
Ms. Robinson,
Yes.
Mr. Tran,
Yes.
Ms. Oliver Davila,
Yes.
Mr. Loconto.
Yes.
The grants are approved unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. We're going to move as I mentioned, out of order on the agenda to briefly consider the action item entitled Release of Executive Session Minutes. The committee, as folks know who are frequent viewers of the committee proceedings, this committee periodically reviews in collaboration with the district's legal advisor the minutes of our executive sessions and votes to publicly release those once the reason for having entered into executive session no longer applies. Legal counsel has recommended the release of 20 executive session minutes this evening. I believe some of these date back as far as the Carol Johnson administration. I'll open it up now to questions and comments from the committee. Any? No, hearing none. If there's nothing further, I'll entertain a motion to approve the following executive session minutes as presented. I'm going to read briefly the dates of these executive session minutes, and then I'll ask for a motion again. September 1, 2010, March 2, 2011, February 1, 2012, March 21, 2012, November 18, 2015, December 17, 2015, January 13, 2016, September 21, 2016, November 2, 2016, November 16, 2016, January 11th, 2017, March 15th, 2017, April 26, 2017, May 10, 2017, September 6, 2017, September 12th, 2018, October 10th, 2018, March 27th, 2019, June 12th, 2019, and September 16th, 2020. And again, as I noted earlier, these are executive session minutes that are no longer considered confidential. These are items that primarily reference collective bargaining discussions among the committee, although there are a number of other items that we typically speak about in an executive session. And we will now entertain a motion to approve the release of these executive session minutes as presented.
Hi, before we vote on that,
yes, Mr. Tran.
There are several of those minutes of those executive session minutes that predated my time serving on the committee, with the exception of the last three, 2019.
That's correct.
All of the other are way before my time. Do I vote on those without knowing without having actually participated in those meetings?
Well, Mr. Tran, that's a good question. And in fact, a number of these minutes predate my time on the committee, and I've been on the committee for 7 years. Nevertheless, it's our, I won't speak to Mr. O'Neill's tenure, but nevertheless, our role as school committee members are to pass judgment on whether these executive session minutes shall be released as a body. So we are voting in the shoes of our former school committee members that served in these positions at the time that these minutes were taken. So I hope that's helpful. I hope that's some context.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tran. Mr. O'Neill?
Mr. Chair, I simply assume that these have been reviewed by legal counsel and it is their recommendation that these be released. In which case, and you can confirm that for me.
That is correct.
Yes, and so in which case, I would be comfortable voting on these. I actually do think I probably was involved in every single one of them because I read them over, but I can understand how some newer members may question, but Mr. Tran, it would be my belief that you would be able to vote on these as well because you're voting about whether to release them based upon the advice of BPS legal counsel.
That's correct.
And I know I'm speaking to two lawyers as I say that.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Are there before we proceed to the motion, are there any other further questions or clarifications from the committee? Well, hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve these executive session minutes for release as presented.
So moved.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Sounds like a second from Ms. Robinson. Any discussion, further discussion or objection to that motion? Hearing none, Ms. Sullivan, will you please call the roll?
Dr. Coleman,
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Dr. Rivera,
Yes.
Ms. Robinson,
Yes.
Mr. Tran,
Yes.
Ms. Oliver Davila,
Yes.
Mr. Lecanto.
Yes.
Minutes are approved unanimously.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Sullivan, and thank you, members, for indulging that brief diversion on the agenda. So we have now come to the final action item, which is the item that's been the topic of discussion for most of the evening. This action item is the superintendent's recommendation to suspend the entrance exam for the exam school. I think this might be written wrong, or either it's too late for me to read it. I'm sorry. The superintendent's recommendation is to suspend the entrance exam for our district exam school admissions for 1 year and to implement a new exam school's admissions criteria for school year 21-22 only. Now, you recall that earlier this evening, as well as at our last meeting, the Exam Schools Criteria Working Group, led by Michael Kanapasis and Tanisha Sullivan, both of whom are still with us this evening, as well as Ms. Roberts, Mr. Miller, and Ms. Hogan, I believe, to answer additional questions, if there are any. Presented their recommendation for a one-year exception to the current exam school admissions criteria in light of the current pandemic and the 7 months of interrupted learning that students have experienced across the city during that time. So at this time, we're going to open it up for final questions or comments for the committee, from the committee, excuse me. And I think this is, as we all recognize, a pretty significant vote, perhaps the most significant vote that many of us will take serving on this committee. Often the most important votes that we take are the budget every year. And then of course, any sort of votes that might come up with regard to closure of schools or something along those lines. But this is something that has been an issue, as all of us recognize, for decades in this city. And it's taken a pandemic to bring it to the fore for us. So I would ask our members, I think everyone, or I will assume that everyone would like to speak on this. So what I'd ask is that we go around, and I see Mr. James already has his hand up, so we can certainly start with our student representative to speak, but I'll certainly ask that we go around the table to each member that wishes to ask questions or make a statement. And then we can go around again if anyone missed out on anything that they wanted to say, and then we can close it out and move to a vote. So I see Dr. Rivera's got her hand up as well. We're going to start with Mr. James and then go to Dr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair Lecanto. I've been listening the entire meeting. I've been collecting my thoughts and those who have spoken in public comment into a sort of statement that I hope will not take more than 6 minutes. And I really want to speak from the perspective of a Black young man in this district. I first want to say that I fully support the working group's proposal, and I'm thankful that this particular working group was able to take such a holistic and equitable approach to the matter of exam school admissions, and specifically want to highlight the special provision for homeless students and students in DCF custody. As a young person who has been both homeless and in the custody of DCF in my past in DCF, in my past in BPS, I greatly appreciate the special attention for that. So that really meant a lot to me. I want to begin with advocating on behalf of the Boston Student Advisory Council by asking the working group to be required to have student representatives on the working group. When speaking with BSAC, we initially believed that asking for just one student to sit on the working group would suffice. However, as we continue to discuss the matter of student voice being implemented in this monumental moment, we realized that we shouldn't have to settle for one student like we normally do, which is exactly why I'm asking, and we are asking, for at least 3 students to sit on the working group, one from each exam school, preferably BSAC reps from these schools. I know this may seem bold or in some ways too much for some people, or not, but I always find myself saying this quite a lot. Student voice is extremely important, not just during this crisis. It's always been important and necessary for true systematic reform. To leave out students in this decision-making process will only further create distrust in the district and alienate them from important decisions that directly impact them. So I strongly urge my fellow committee members to support BSAC and I in pushing for this amendment. Next, I heard a lot of parents expressing their concerns for their children's work turning meaningless with the test not being administered for this year's exam schools process. When 9 times out of 10, students who challenge themselves to prepare for the standardized test usually do the same with their schoolwork as well. This new admissions process that the working group has come up with, it looks and analyzes students' GPAs and MCAT scores pre-COVID, like the superintendent said. The superintendent said earlier that they couldn't have known that this was going to happen. In other words, as long as your child has been essentially giving that same amount of attention and devotion to preparing for the ISE to their own schoolwork, I don't see why they wouldn't make it into an exam school. And I don't think it's a matter of whether or not BPS is capable of administering the test. It's that we won't. It's unsafe, it's inequitable, it's discriminatory. When I hear things like communities being equal, Black activists supporting systematic oppression, reverse discrimination, reverse racism, I get terrified. I get terrified and I get really, really emotional. This is the perfect example of a historically racist system creating entitled, ignorant superiority complexes. All of us need to recognize systematic racism, especially when it's at play in our own communities. I want to end by reiterating that the current exam school admissions process with the standardized test was highly unfair to Black and Brown students. And I get emotional when I talk about this. Black and Brown students like myself had to work 10 times as hard as their white counterparts to get into these exam schools and to succeed in a society full of bigotry, racism, and many white folk who believe they were entitled to any and everything. I remember standing outside of Excel High School in South Boston at the age of 13 with many other students as we waited to be let in to begin the test. I was standing with a friend of mine and both of us were extremely nervous, sweating almost. We came into contact with a white student and we began small talk. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, that he had taken over 5 practice tests and completed several classes in preparation for the test. Meanwhile, my friend and I had barely gotten any prep for the test at all, but instead had to study everything and anything we could by going online and going through siblings of friends who attended exam schools. This is educational inequality right in front of our faces. I hear many people say the test won't be fair this year during COVID. Yes, but let's not forget the test was never fair. You heard Dr. Kendi's statement earlier that, quote, standardized tests have become the most effective racist strategy. We all know this. We've seen it with our own eyes. Let us repeat this to ourselves as we move forward in this social justice work while addressing the elephant in the room. Why not get rid of the test and adopt a new system with a few amendments permanently beyond just this 1 year? We have to be bold so our policy can be bold. We need to move towards educational equity in our district and truly provide our students and families with all the opportunities we offer with equal access to all of them. It's heartwarming to see that this issue has gained so much momentum and support, and BSAC and I will not let this go undiscussed, especially without student voice and more community input. I look forward to further discussion on this very, very important matter as the year progresses. Again, I strongly urge my fellow committee members to vote yes on this proposed policy as a step in the right direction towards educational equality and narrowing the opportunity and achievement gap. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. James. Move on now to Dr. Rivera.
Okay, good evening, everyone. And thanks again to all the folks that testified and sticking around with us at this late hour. I'm gonna read a document. I prepared some remarks knowing that I would not be coherent at this hour. So I'm gonna read my prepared remarks, and I'm also going to submit these to Liz to put into the public record. As some of you know, I'm a sociologist. I'm a professor of ethnic studies at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. I direct a research institute called the Gaston Institute, where we focus on social inequalities and the education of Latinx and immigrant students. I also am the parent, a single parent of a 7th grader who attends the Patrick Linden School in West Roxbury. I joined the Boston School Committee in 2019 because I was deeply and am deeply committed to addressing the racial and ethnic disparities in educational achievement and to advance ethnic studies and racial equity in the school district. So I strongly support the exam schools working proposal as a step in the right direction. I would invite the public to look at the Gaston Institute's report that we did last year called Latinx Students in the Boston Exam Schools, growing but consistently underrepresented, so that again, you can see some of the data we also collected on some of these disparities. I have to say that as BSC members, many of us received hundreds of emails in opposition as well as in favor, but those that were in opposition really, to me, were disturbing racialized discourse in many of these letters. And I lost count of how many emails were addressed to us that opened with, "Dear City Councilors, I am your constituent in West Roxbury or Charlestown, and I vote," with the stress on "I vote," reading to me, Latinx families, maybe African-American families don't vote, so they don't matter. And that was really, to me, the messages behind things like, "This is reverse discrimination at its finest," a quote, "You should step down," quote, "Your support on the proposal is absolutely discrimination," quote, "It's a criminal act against taxpayers' will," quote, "All lives matter." And when I hear that, I read, Black lives don't matter. And so I think we have to really be careful as well how we're talking about these issues. And it is triggering. And I thank Mr. James for mentioning that, because when I hear these things as a person of color, it really, really hurts. One letter summarized the self-righteousness of white privilege in some of the writers and parents even that testified this evening. This letter said, "As a 20-year plus resident of Boston, a taxpayer, a professional in the city, this is an apparent push to drive out the very families who have contributed to the vibrancy and betterment of our city, our city." So the writer is suggesting here that BPS is driving out the very families that have contributed to the vibrancy and betterment of our city. Whose city are we talking about here? Are Black and brown families not contributing to the betterment of the city? And don't they deserve the same quality of life and access to opportunities? As a resident of Boston for 30 years and a person who teaches race and ethnic relations, I know that racism is alive and well in our city. And it is tragic that it has had to take a pandemic to bring about these long overdue changes with regards to the exam schools. So I'm gonna just summarize here that I do think the working group proposal actually doesn't go far enough. We used to set aside 35% of our seats for underrepresented minorities. Especially, we need to do more with English learners. I believe it doesn't go far enough because white students would continue to benefit from 32% of the seats. According to this plan, look at the data. It's not a huge change for Asian and white families, but it is a big change for the Black and Latinx students. So I do believe that as well, I've said this publicly, that students that have attended BPS should have some weighted priority, a weighted priority, not the most important priority, but a weighted priority given the fact that most of the students from private school, really, that more students from private schools are admitted than our very own Boston Public School students. And that's another injustice. So I think also that I do recommend that the task force include alumni, include students such as Mr. James suggested, and I strongly approve. And as well, that we include some external experts here and some third-party vendors who can remain neutral in making these decisions. I lament that there were no academic researchers who are experts in education research and assessment that could have been included on this working group, but nonetheless, there was a lot of expertise. But I do hope that the task force that goes forward includes some folks with expertise with data analysis so they can monitor the impact of these proposed changes. And finally, it is shocking to learn that BLS has a private endowment of over $60 million and that there's clearly unbalanced power in our school district. So as we also begin planning for next year's school budgets, I do believe that we should redistribute our wealth so that all our schools receive the funding they need so that all students receive an excellent education. If we are to become an anti-racist school district, we must begin by changing the admissions procedures for our exam schools. So for all these reasons, I strongly support the working group proposal. And I thank you for allowing me the time to share these thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks very much, for Dr. Rivera, and thank you for organizing your thoughts in that way for all of us to hear. Let's move on now to Dr. Coleman, and if there are other members that want to be heard, it looks like Ms. Robinson would be next. Please virtually raise your hands.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate, it was a great learning experience to hear the wide diversity of opinion in the community about what to do. Strong understanding that this pandemic is influencing this choice moment. I share some of the concerns that were raised that we are spending an inordinate amount of time on maybe 20% of our secondary students, when 30% of our supposedly secondary students aren't qualified to finish secondary school in Boston Public Schools. And we have not, in my time in this district, spent the equivalent amount of time on a much larger percentage of our high need students as we are doing now, which really speaks to this interaction of power, privilege, and failed opportunities for too many of our children. So, but I want to try to stay focused on this proposal, because I think there's a lot of other complex issues that are raised. And in terms of answering the question that we asked, I felt that this working group has come up with a very thoughtful and reasonable solution. I believe that as we go forward with it, we're going to have to be responsive to the data. And as things don't evolve the way we've hypothesized, we need to be able to change. So in terms of the actual change for this year in the admissions process for the exam schools, I am more than willing to support that completely. I am not, however, able to, in good conscience, support the additional recommendations, which were beyond the scope of what we were asking of them. And let me explain a little bit about my thinking there. And in particular, I can't support a proposal that the next step is a working or task force that's focused on the exams, the process of admission to the exam school. I think that's way too limited a question and inappropriate for us at this time. As you all know, I think these kind of selective systems in a public school environment reflects a history of systematic classism and racism, that by limiting our conversation to admissions into the exam schools, we're perpetuating the very foundations of that system. So one of the things I want to point out is that in the committee did this very good job of looking at the history of the exam schools in our system, but I think they left out a couple of very important issues. When the Boston Latin School was started, it was a social justice moment at that time to create access to a college preparatory school in a public system which many people could not afford, and to create that in the community is remarkable and wonderful, and really does reinforce, our well-earned proud of being the birthplace of public education, and that was excellent. Since then, however, the ways in which we have managed these exam schools have reflected growing issues of racism and selectivity. And I don't want to have to repeat, I thought Professor Kendi did an excellent job of bringing the eugenics argument, which is fundamental to anything that's based on testing and the resources that families of wealth. And if I had stayed in Boston and my kids had gone here, like Professor Kendi, I would have had no problem providing the resources to be successful. But more important, BLS was started as a college prep school, and that's what it was. And into the 1950s, 60s, many people just went to normal schools. The rest of the school system was not organized around preparing people for college. And therefore we had a few schools, and this is true across the country, a few schools that were actually college prep, that would prepare you to go into a four-year college. And most of the other high schools were not. They were normal schools. In fact, my mother is a graduate of BLA because she grew up in New Orleans, graduated from a normal school, which everyone else is doing. And in order to start her career at BU, she had to finish her time at BLA. So it's common practice. Then, and that issue becomes a problem for us because we have many schools in our district that offer college preparatory systems. But we do that, and we had these comprehensive high schools, English High, which we need to remember, English High, within memory, was the competitor with Boston Latin School. It wasn't BLA, it wasn't the O'Brien, it was English High, which was not an exam school or a selective school. The kids would go, they would select it, and they did very well, and it was a college preparatory school, and we have a wonderful history of people graduating from that. But now we have a system where we're saying we have all these college prep programs, but we're going to create these 3 that are special and get more resources, get more money, get the best kids, get everything, and then turn around and look at what's happening in the rest of our schools. We're not distributing resources appropriately. So without going, and there's more detail in this conversation, I'm delighted to have it, but I can vote comfortably for a recommendation that says we're going to have a task force that is going to look at creating schools of opportunities across the district, that's going to take on our secondary education process in a substantive way, as superintendents already initiating a conversation about high school redesign. And if we include, as Dr. Revere said, experts in this process, and really think about what should our secondary school system look like, act like, be like going forward in a way that's going to really allow us to have gap closing schools. And that's our opportunity. And to limit that to just a focus on the examination, the process of admission to 3 of our high schools, which only take in 20% of our students, when 30% are failing, which means there's another 50% who's floundering where? Doing what? What are we doing for them? And we need to take that as a coherent and complete conversation and not just limit it to these 3, what become these curated, specialized schools that really don't reflect a district. If our primary responsibility is to become a gap closing district, if we limit and give all our resources to looking at these 3 schools, I think we're failing too many of our kids and our children, and we're not taking advantage of this opportunity to reinvent our secondary school systems. I'm not saying that the Boston Latin curriculum is not a great curriculum to have, that people should be able to choose, but it's set up so that it looks like it's the better school and the better curriculum because we curate who gets in there. So I don't want to go much further. So therefore, I would really prefer that we separate this vote between a vote on the proposed next year's admission system and a separate vote on the task force recommendations. And I would actually furthermore like to say we break those 3 recommendations down to the 3 recommendations. One is give support to the kids who are coming in. The other is to start redoing our pre-examination process. Again, I think that's kind of sticking with the idea that we have to have exam schools. And I don't know why we have to, except for some historical reasons that I think are grounded in the conjoined twinship of racism and capitalism in our society. So if we can't split those, I'm voting no.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman. We'll go to Ms. Robinson now.
Okay.
Fran.
You want to say something else?
No, I'm sorry. I just said, and then to Mr. Tran.
All righty, thank you. This has been quite an evening. And I think as, you know, over this past week, receiving the hundreds of emails that went in either direction, I was quite struck that even though we're talking about 3 schools, it really felt like we were talking about 1 school. The majority of the communication we had was about Boston Latin School. It really wasn't about the 3 exam schools, which, you know, I feel for me, sends us in a direction about, we are, as Dr. Coleman is saying, we're failing significant numbers of our students by focusing in one place. I mean, we've spent a lot of time, and probably the most substantive conversation that we've had about schools in the 5 years that I've been on the committee has been what we've done in this last couple of weeks, which says, yes, it's important, but shame on all of us that we have 50,000 kids and 5,000 plus high school students. And we've put a lot of energy, the city has put a lot of energy into one school. I think what Mr. James has said is something that we all need to think about in terms of what are we trying to provide for all of our students moving forward. This needs to be about the exam schools this next year, but it really is the conversation about what's going to happen with all of our high schools to make sure that they can all be highly selective. But also, I mean, again, we keep saying, what is it going to say about our whole district? That it feels like everywhere we look, we have great work to do. So we've both upset and supported 1,000 folk in what we've been talking about this last 2 weeks. But we've got 50,000 plus kids that we need to deal with. So how can we see this as a beginning of a set of very, very serious conversations, work groups, conversations that need to continue to include the thousands of people that have weighed in this last week with opinions about what we should do next, and how do we turn that into actual advocacy and support and watchfulness over all of what's going on in our education system, because we cannot have this vote be tonight, people go off in a work group, but that we don't continue to push back at the many questions and issues that have gotten raised about the quality overall of our high school education and our opportunities or perceived opportunities by families that if they don't get into this one school, somehow their child's whole future is gone. We know that's not true. And we do a disservice to all of our students and to our city if we allow that to be the thought process that we have. So yes, I am strongly in favor of moving forward with the recommendation of the work group, but I feel like what happens next needs to be broader than just with what should happen with the exam school admissions process, but really needs to be a serious look at qualitatively, what do we owe all of our high school students in terms of a quality experience? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. And certainly, as you and I have spoken many times this week and beyond about Dr. Cassellius's plans for this year's budget, she has spoken many times about focusing this year's budget process on improving our high schools, which is a follow-on what was the focus in last year's budget of improving our lowest performing schools. And so this is an opportune time for us to be talking about our 3 highest performing high schools and the seismic shifts that we'll be undertaking through this vote if it passes this evening. But what that means for all of our other schools, many of which are very high performing as well. And I wish folks would look beyond the 3 exam schools to see some of the great schools that we have available, like Snowden, you heard in comments earlier, and Fenway, and Boston Arts Academy, and the Muñez Academy. And I always worry that when I start listing schools, I miss a few. New Mission, I think New Mission for the last decade has sent their valedictorian and salutatorian to an Ivy League school. So I could go on, there are many others, but I'll leave it at that. That's absolutely going to have to be the focus of the work that we do over this next year in the budget process. So we'll move on now to Mr. Tran.
Hi, particularly, I would like to address my comment to parents and constituents who participated today during the testimonial period. Like all members on the Boston School Committee, I did also receive several emails, letters, and phone calls from parents, but a lot of them are from Asians, ranging from Vietnamese, Chinese, and other Asians that are somehow in some way involved with the Boston Public School. Let me say this, I hear you loud and clear. I understand your issue loud and clear. I hear your concern regarding zip code allocation. I hear your concern regarding the unequal value given to the GPA by different schools. And among other things, those are the two things that I have heard over and over again. And I hear you, I share with you. One thing I can make sure that you hear me is that as an Asian member on the school committee, I'm here. Call me, I listen to you. Send emails to me, I respond to you. And I will do my best in whatever way to address the concerns that you have. Now let's get to the real problem here today we have. The policy in front of us. I was originally an engineer. Through my time in my work, of course, I've learned something. I've experienced something. I may have experienced many things that you have experienced. So I went to law school and I have spent the last 30 years fighting for civil rights, which I'm hoping that you can hear me and you can see that I'm trying as sincerely as possible to address the concern. Many of you sent me court decisions regarding school admission policy. Many of you call me and explain the situation that may involve, that may cause some detriments to Asians because of the policy. Let me tell you this. Because of my profession, I have invested a good amount of time in monitoring and learning, as well as becoming very familiar with the succession of court cases or court decisions regarding school admission tests. One thing I can say this. When we have, this is the problem I have. This is the problem I have. When an issue that is seen as divisive between certain races, the Asians are then somehow clustered with one side or the other based on the perception of the community. So for that reason, issues regarding education, somehow the Asians are clumped with the white privilege. I understand that. I hear you. Be patient. Issues are, each and every one of us have different take on equity, have different lens that we view on racism, on discrimination. But for all that, just because we are somehow viewed or affected by certain policies, albeit those policies may not be as impartial as we hope, but it is a vehicle, a policy that would address what I believe is the maxim of anti-discrimination law, especially dealing with education policy, that is to remediate past practices. So just because of that, maybe we should agree that somehow, as much as the benefactors of those policies, sometimes we may want to take a step back and share those benefits with others. So for that, please, especially the Asian American people, accept my sincere opinion that I do believe in my own lens of equity, the policy before us will not and definitely will not affect your children. Because of that, I'm going to vote yes for the next year. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Mr. Tran. I believe Mr. O'Neill, you were next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I first of all want to thank all the people that spoke this evening and all the people that emailed us and left voicemail messages for us and reached out and gave us their thoughtful opinion. I will say, typically when the school committee has a big decision like this, we usually hear from people that are opposed to what is being proposed. Traditionally, people that are in favor of it don't actually speak up quite often. And yet in this case, I would say the majority of the emails that I received were in favor of this proposal. And I think that was emblematic of the comments tonight, that they were more in favor of this proposal than against. And I found that very interesting, that people wanted to speak up and this was such a powerful issue for them. And so I thank everyone. I read, reflected, thought on all the comments that we received. I also want to thank Mr. James, Dr. Rivera, Ms. Robinson, Dr. Coleman, and Mr. Tran for this conversation to date, because I learned from each of you and really thoughtful, powerful comments. And I appreciate all that everyone said. You know, I've been reflecting on this a lot, and I want to start off by saying I understand completely the superintendent and the working group's recommendation to not have an assessment this year. And I pushed on it. As the superintendent knows, I asked a lot of questions over the past week. I wanted to understand the thought process behind it, where it was coming from, why it was different from other things. And so I support the working group's conclusion on that. And more importantly, you know, I do have some concerns on what the working group that came up with. I'm concerned about using zip codes over geocodes or census tracts. I'm concerned in some neighborhoods where you have, you know, some poverty and some wealth nearby. I think it gets masked by using zip codes. I am concerned over grade parity between our grades and the private parochial charter school grading system. I'm concerned over implementation and how this is done with fidelity. But I'm also confident the working group really looked closely at these issues and talked it through, and most importantly, reached a compromise. And compromise is a bad word right now nationally. It is seen as a sign of weakness to compromise. And yet I believe it's a badge of honor. And I am so impressed by, Abraham Lincoln put together his cabinet and they called it a team of rivals. Well, I wouldn't exactly say the working group was a team of rivals, but it was definitely people that were coming at this issue from very different perspectives. And they worked really hard, as the chair and the superintendent said before, these are people that down deep care about our children, just like all of us do, the members of the school committee do. And that's why we work till 1 o'clock in the morning on issues like this, gladly, because we care about all the youth and our concern. And so that this group who comes at it from very different viewpoints were able to come up with a pretty carefully crafted compromise, and I will call it a compromise, on what to do for this year. And Dean Coleman, you had a little bit of a history lesson for us. I'm only going to go back to July. Back in June or so, the superintendent had told us all during the spring that she was not comfortable with the previous exam, that she was putting it out for an RFP. That started back in February. And then in June, I believe it was, told us that she was selecting MAP. And then in early July, the Opportunity Achievement Gap Task Force said, hey, wait, folks, I think you should not have it. We think you should not have an exam this year. And that kicked off the conversation at this level. And we as a committee said, let's have a separate group get together, think about it, and give us recommendations on what to do this year. And that's exactly what they did. They have come back with recommendations on what to do this year about an exam policy for our 3 schools that have exams. And not everyone, we have different opinions. We approach this from different viewpoints, even though we all believe we're trying to care for all of our students. But this group that looked at it so intensely and looked at the data and thought it through came up with a compromise position that effectively said a couple of things. We think this year it should be grades only. We think this year we should start to incorporate zip codes as a way to have more equity and equality across the entire city. And we think there should be a working group going forward to look at how we do it permanently for these 3 schools. And that was all, and there were several other requests as well. Most importantly, in my mind, support for the students that are entering the school and how to finance it. So I believe it is very important to voice strong support for this compromise position that was reached by this group of people that looked at it really, really in depth and came out with a solution that I am comfortable supporting and will support tonight. Dr. Coleman, I do want to address the point that you brought up, and I respect you, and you and I have had conversations about this over years, and I learn every time I listen from you. I do respectfully ask you to consider that the second issue that you bring up about how we doing with our high schools overall, and what do we want to do with that may be a separate issue. And in fact, the superintendent is already working on it with her high school redesign. And I'd love to get into a conversation with her, not now at 1 o'clock in the morning, but is it appropriate to have a task force that works on that is looking at that issue as well? Or would she like to have a working group on it, et cetera? I'm just nervous about upsetting the apple cart of the recommendations that this group worked so hard on to achieve consensus on and present to us, that I feel an obligation to vote in full support of all of their recommendations as a package, even while I am respecting and understanding the additional point that you were bringing up and suggesting that we, have that conversation as well, but separate from these recommendations that this group has put in front of us. And so I will vote to support it. To me, it comes down to, when I was chair, I was very proud, and Dean Coleman, you were vice chair, we were very proud together to put together the Opportunity Achievement Gap Task Force, to reinvigorate it, to add the word opportunity, to work with the district to start an opportunity and achievement stopgap office to work on funding it, to help them get it across the whole district. This, to me, is an outgrowth of that task force. And I thank the co-chairs of that task force, including Ms. Robinson and Pastor Acevedo. And could someone...
Shakur.
Alicia Shakur, right, thank you. I'm sorry, I had her name right on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and I thank the three of them for pushing our thinking on this. And this is an outgrowth of that work. And I want to be respectful of that. I want to offer my unconditional support. To me, this is where we walk the walk in saying that we're taking the action to provide equity of opportunity for all of our students. And I'm proud to do that. And so I will vote to support the recommendations of the working group today. And I offer my incredible thanks to all who worked on the working group for what you have done and what you'll continue to do. And lastly, I simply want to say to Jose Valenzuela, the BLS grad who is a BLA teacher and spoke tonight. Mr. Valenzuela, I can't wait to visit your class at Boston Latin Academy when school reopens. I love the fact that you are teaching the future youth of our city. And I want to applaud your comments this evening and give thanks that you are teaching and molding our future youth. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill, and thank you for recognizing the work of the OAG task force in pushing this issue and calling the question. And thank you for reminding us all of that. I want to go back to Mr. James before we hear from the Vice Chair. Mr. James.
Hi, thank you, Chairman. I'd like to add that the simple fact that so many parents feel as though their kids can only succeed at exam schools speaks to the lack of advertisement and funding in other BPS's amazing high schools, like the chairman listed, BAA, BCLA, BGA, New Mission, Fenway. I have friends, I have people I've graduated middle school with who go to these schools and have been participating in amazing opportunities and have been extremely successful, just like myself. So I agree that we need to focus on our other high schools. But let's start here where we are right now. We've already built so much momentum around this issue and finally have a chance to combat systematic racism and educational inequality. Let this be the first battle in a long fight against these societal injustices. We don't need a test. We simply don't need one. We've seen so many people come to public comment today and express their support with the district's current plan. Why not take that and really work on it and make it a permanent resolution to the issue? So again, I urge my fellow committee members, I know I don't have a vote, so I have to put together in the most articulate, straightforward way that I can. I would really, 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 really highly recommend that you all vote on this policy tonight, because this is monumental. This is history. This is a huge step forward. I fully support the plan, and I just wanted to say that.
Well, thank you once again, Mr. James. That's appreciated further commentary from someone who obviously is the closest to the issue out of all of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
I did want to just take a moment to procedurally to say thank you to our ASL interpreters. They had a hard stop of 1 a.m. and I neglected to say thank you to them before they left. But for those of you that are maybe hard of hearing and are still with us, the subtitles, closed captioning option is still available to you. And we regret that we couldn't keep ASL interpretation any longer. Okay, we will hear from the Vice Chair now, Ms. Oliver Davila.
Thank you, Chair. It's very hard to follow Kimani. I mean, I don't know what else do I have to say. He said it all, but I'll try to be short. I just also want to thank all of the stakeholders, all the community members, the parents, the students, and especially all the exam school students that came out to testify or who wrote letters, emails, made calls, who are from exam schools that supported and really talked about the importance of having an experience that is diverse. And you can't beat having those experiences. Those make people richer in so many ways. I also want to just thank the working group. I know that they worked furiously all summer long. And the fact that they came to consensus, I think, is a huge thing. And I also want to thank all the staff that worked on it, and also the superintendent, because she talked about this in her interviews and how important this was to her. And I know this is, dear to her heart. So I thank her for her leadership. I know this was said before, but I'm going to say it again. I really wish that our community would get as riled up about the rest of our schools as they have about this. I don't necessarily want to spend whatever amount of hours we had tonight. I realize it's important to a lot of people, and I'm not saying it's not important, but I think we have a lot of amazing schools. And there are a lot of schools that are struggling. And if we spent this much energy on those struggling schools, perhaps they wouldn't be so struggling. And so I cannot wait for us to have this much energy to talk about some of those struggling schools and how we support them. I also want to thank Ms. Sullivan for her comments. They were right on target, and Dr. Kendi's letter was just so emotional, both her comments and his letter. I was really trying not to cry because it was just so powerful what they both said. And I think speaking as a person of color and all the experiences I've had growing up in Boston that have not been positive, and that is why I do the work that I do in my day job, because I don't want any young person to feel the things that I felt of not being good enough and not being smart enough and feeling less than and feeling shame and not valuing or having anybody tell me my language or my culture was an asset, not having any teachers that were teachers of color until I was in college. I mean, that's ridiculous. So I just really want to thank again her for her comments and the whole working group. I think that we talked a lot about this year and that it's because of COVID harm, and COVID harm is real, and it has impacted African American, Black, immigrant, undocumented, Latino communities the hardest, both in terms of the actual virus and in terms of economically. But for me, it's beyond that. And it is sad that it takes a pandemic to get us to have this conversation. It is real, but it's beyond that. And I really want us to continue having this conversation. I think some of the electeds talked about really pushing this forth, and I also want to push this forth. I do not think this should be just a one-year piece. However, I do think that the task force will have, I know they'll have more dialogue. It's a different time. We're in a different time period, and they'll be able to elicit feedback and have different, members as part of that task force. I mean, we know that Black and Latino youth are underrepresented, and they have been locked out of this opportunity. And for me, it's just criminal that the percentages have not increased, in like 3 decades or more. To me, that is racist. There's no other way for me to look at it. And I was offended by some of the emails that I received because there was a lot of conversation about how there would be a decrease in rigor. And I really appreciated so many of the speakers that talked about the fact that it was not about that. And also that we already had been accepting students with a B grade. We're not, dumbing it down as some people would say. Our students of color are just as smart as anyone else. And it's really about opportunity. They don't start at the same level playing fields. For example, students who live in more advantaged homes, by the time they're 3 years old, they have been exposed to 30 million more vocabulary words. And that's not because, Black or Latino undocumented people aren't smart. It's a matter of what we have done as a society. If we look at racism in this country, if we look at Latin America and being colonized and raped and pillaged, all of those things are historical, and they have brought us to this point where we haven't had the same access, we haven't had the same wealth, and we don't start at a level playing field. So I was very deeply offended by those comments. I think that all of our schools should reflect the student body that we have. It should not be acceptable to have schools that don't represent that. Just not acceptable. And I do stand by my statements from the last meeting that I think that BPS students should have a greater weight and priority who have been going to school in BPS. You know, the task force will have to look at that, but I do stand by my statements. I think that it was a thoughtful proposal. It's a good start. Again, I don't think that it goes far enough. I think we should continue to seek feedback. We should have alumni on that task force. We should have some other languages as parents who speak other languages. And I do think I'm going to vote for this. The one concern that I have, and I'm going to vote on this regardless of my concern, but I think the task force should take a deeper look, is I am concerned about the hidden poverty in zip codes. So I would like to take a deeper look, because I know there are certain neighborhoods that that have low-income families that are living there, but the neighborhood itself is seen as a wealthy neighborhood. So I just would like to take a deeper look at that. And I just want to lastly say that I really, really appreciated so many parents that came forward and who are in my situation. I have a 6th grader. She was part of the exam school initiative this summer. And, you know, I think that many parents that came forward really talked about the fact, and Dr. Kendi too, I think he said it better than I can say it, is I realize that I live in Rosendale, so she's going to have less of a chance. And you know what? I am okay with that, because I know that she has had a lot of supports that other families don't have, that I can provide, you know, and so I'm okay with that. And I just really want to say, for those people that came and said that, really from the bottom of my heart, I was very, very touched. And I thank you for being able to see the bigger picture of equity, and that, you know, sometimes we have to pass on things for the greater good of everybody, and I am okay with that. So thank you for letting me say those words.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. Truly appreciate your additional comments. Before I close with my comments, I want to go first around to the committee to see if there are any further comments from the committee. I think everyone said their piece, but I also thought we did hear briefly from Pastor Acevedo, one of the working group members at the last meeting. And I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize that I think 8 of our 9 working group members who've put in so much time, including the over 8 hours of this meeting tonight, to stick with us throughout this entire process. I don't want to put anyone on the spot, certainly. We've already heard from Ms. Sullivan and Mr. Kanapasas tonight as well, but if any of the other working group members would like to say a few words, I know it's spontaneous, but I'd like to give these folks an opportunity to speak up.
Thank you. Let's vote.
So does that mean I don't get to speak, Pastor Acevedo?
After words of wisdom, yes, Jim.
No, fair observation. But again, you know, this is out of recognition for, again, just the yeoman's work, yeowoman's work that each of you put in here on this process. You know, I think this leads into my comments fairly well, because I have to say, for one, I'm exhausted. Not tonight, but by the process that we've put ourselves through over the last couple months in the name of creating an equitable system for our students and a merit-based system for our students for these exam schools. In what might be the worst time of our lives that all of us have experienced or will experience. So I just want to put that out there. And, you know, we're all stressed and we're all tired. And I just want to name that and to ask this committee to continue doing what it's doing. We've been sitting through a number of 7 or 8 hour school committee meetings for the last 7 or 8 months. And certainly superintendent, I've made light of it before, but I think, you know, you work 36 hour days and 10 days a week on behalf of these students and our families. But we do it for the kids. Every kid in this district is who we're serving with the critical decisions that we're making, particularly in this time. And so with that, that's what brings me to the observation that, you know, I've served a long time in public service, you know, for the most part in the background. You know, I've spent about 18 years in public service, and I feel like I've done some good things. And I'm just speaking personally for a moment before I move back to the issue that's at hand. But just thinking about the ingenuity of this working group, the commitment of this committee, the commitment of our superintendent, of our mayor, and all of our the folks in the district coming to do this work amidst this pandemic every day. This is the proudest moment that I've had in my 18 years in public service. So I just want to name that. I say that because this isn't the outcome that I had pictured a couple months ago. You know, I thought we could salvage a test. You know, that's when this began. We heard very critically from the Opportunity and Achievement Gap Task Force that we should suspend the test. It became a Twitter hashtag. And I think, you know, I typically have a reaction that goes a little bit something like this. We don't make policy by tweet. We don't make policy by hashtag. And that is, and I want to make clear that that is not any commentary on the good work of our task force. But we had work to do. And the position that we were in June and July when the calls came in to suspend the test at that time, our city was in a different position. And many of us were in a different mindset with respect to what might be possible with this school year. And I think we were at a point over the summer thinking we would all be back in school in September. And maybe not everyone every day, but we would certainly be much closer to what a normal school year and school day looks like than where we're at right now. So to have this solution and have it be such a radical departure from what we are typically accustomed to in this district for admissions in the exam schools, the enormity of this decision is apparent from the reaction of the community, good and bad, positive and negative. And again, you know, this response isn't at its base. I just want to reiterate, it's meant to be a critical part of our pandemic response. You heard the mayor talk about that about 7.5 hours ago. And, you know, I think a lot of the commentary focuses on, you know, the fact that we've got a rising infection rate and whether we can get a test done in the current rate, and the fact that we have other testing going on that's similar to this. I want to respectfully put that to the side, because I think the real reason why we can't do this test this year is in light of the 7 months of interrupted educational experiences that all students in this district have experienced, and specifically the losses in learning outcomes that a great number of our students have suffered as a result of those 7 months of uninterrupted learning. And so from that standpoint, a test this year couldn't measure ability, in my view. It would only measure means. An assessment that measures means but not ability is not the type of measurement that we need to be using to determine the aptitude and the capacity of our students to perform and succeed in these exam schools. And I want to note that there's a number of other, districts that are facing the same question. San Francisco just last night voted on Lowell High School to eliminate all entrance requirements. Lowell is their Latin. That's another radical step. I understand that was not a unanimous vote, and I understand that one of the school committee members in San Francisco was pointing to Boston as the reasonable solution. And so I wish he would have come here and spoken public comment tonight, but nevertheless, we will take it. But before I close, I did want to bring us back. We've talked a lot about race tonight. We've talked a lot about ethnicity and socioeconomic impacts. And I wanted to focus our comments on refocus our comments on where we're at with COVID. But I'd be remiss and I'd be naive to ignore the racial impacts of this decision. You know, when the first time, I'm not from here. You know, I grew up in Florida. My father grew up in Massachusetts and moved to Florida in 1964. I'm the first person in my family to move back here. And the first time I ever heard of Nubian Square, at the time it was called Dudley Square, was when I read the autobiography of Malcolm X when I was age 15. And, you know, that opened me to some of the experiences of the Black community in Boston. When I got here in 1999, the book assigned to me for my summer reading before I started law school at Northeastern was Common Ground by J. Anthony Lucas, the book chronicling the busing crisis in the 70s. So I'd like to think that I had, you know, some exposure. I would, again, this is, you know, playing up my naivete. But, you know, as you move through your daily life in Boston, we like to think that we're liberal. In Massachusetts, we like to think that we're liberal. We like to think that we're open and accepting, but there really is that divide that exists. And it's sometimes it simmers right below the surface. I think about some conversations I've had over the years with other parents on playgrounds. You know, it was jarring to me, the fact that 40 years later, that people hang on to the issues of busing, particularly when I look at folks in a similar background as mine and say, you know, you've made it, you know, you succeeded. You've been able to succeed in spite of what you perceive to be an issue that negatively affected you 40 years ago. I think about it, you know, in the pro sports context, when you hear about NBA players or Major League Baseball players that don't want to come to Boston to play for the Red Sox or the Celtics because of the taunts you hear in the stands. You know, the first time I heard a racial epithet, again, I'm from the South. I've heard this stuff and it's abhorrent. But the first time I ever heard it actually used against a person was in a Dunkin' Donuts in Cambridge about 15 years ago. So I think what's at the core of, you know, my view here is that, you know, we need to change to get better. We need to make change to get better. We need to take action in an effort to actually show our community and our nation that this city is ready to heal and move on from decades of negative history in this regard. And so nothing prepares you for the enormity of this change and the gravity of this change But I think we need to do this in order to truly heal from our city's past. So I want to close once more on the courage of each and every one of you, of our superintendent, of the working group for bringing this forward to us, for the mayor for owning this, and for pushing us on this. I'd be remiss if I didn't take a moment and just note, I do feel for the 6th grade parents that we've heard from both tonight and in writing. As I started my comments long ago in this meeting earlier tonight, this is an anxious time for a 6th grade parent in normal times. So to have a pandemic laid on top of that, and then an upheaval in the way that we must conduct our admissions as a result, that can only add to the anxiety and the uncertainty. And I'm sorry for that. This is unfortunate timing. But this is the steps that we must take forward to ensure equity of access for all of our residents across the city while maintaining a merit-based approach to admissions to our exam schools. And so I wholeheartely support, I have previously pledged my support for this, but I want to reiterate that I wholeheartedly support this proposal, and thank the working group once more and the superintendent once more for bringing forward this recommendation. So Pastor Acevedo, I hope I didn't go on too long. But nevertheless, I do want to pause. I heard and go procedurally for a moment. I did hear Dr. Coleman earlier express his concerns. It is my fervent hope that we can achieve a unanimity on the vote for the admissions policy. So I will ask Ms. Sullivan to conduct 2 votes once we ask for a motion, to vote first on the amendment to the admissions policy, and then we will take a second vote on the additional exam school recommendations from the working group. I hope the committee will indulge me on that. I'm happy to discuss that briefly if there are any concerns about that. Looking around.
I second.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman.
This is Kamani.
Yes, Mr. James.
I just going back to my point earlier about having student representatives on the working group, I would like to know if that is possible, and if so, I'm not really sure about the logistics around that, if that would be added into the working group's recommendation that you're voting on tonight, or if that's something that would be amended afterwards. But I would just want to reiterate that point. I think student voice is extremely critical, especially on this issue moving forward. And I just wanted to say that on behalf of BSAC and myself.
Thank you, Mr. James. And to that point, we're voting on the establishment of the task force, but not the membership of the task force this evening. Mr. O'Neill.
Yes, Mr. Chair, point of order is just an explanation for Mr. James. First of all, fully support having student voice on the task force. Thank you for pushing that. I know a number of the other members have supported as well. Yes. Our bylaws state that when we form a task force, the chair forms the task force and then comes to us for approval on membership of the task force. So we will have a chance to both give feedback now on what we suggest, such as Dr. Rivera suggesting an academic person as well as student, and a number of us supporting your request and suggestion on having student voice on it. So just want to let you know that typically when we form a task force, we get a chance to actually vote on the membership at a follow-on date.
And can we be clear if it's a superintendent's working group or an official task force of the school committee as well?
Dr. Cassellius, thank you for clarifying that. I believe there was some misunderstanding with respect to the status of the working group going backwards. The working group was indeed a group appointed under your authority. The working group has proposed to continue on, but they haven't proposed the context of their continuing work. What I am taking forward as part of this recommendation and putting forward for the vote this evening is that the working group be elevated to the level of a task force under the school committee. And the critical difference there is, to me at least, is that a task force is a subcommittee of the school committee, which means it's subject to open meeting law, and the members of the working group would deliberate in public, unless there was some exception for executive session, of course. I think it's important to have this continuing discussion in public. We didn't have that luxury for this emergency crisis response, if you will, over the last couple of months, but certainly going forward as we talk about what we're learning here from the working group's work over the last several months, as well as if this plan passes this evening, watching it being put into play. We want to have that discussion out in the open. We want to be able to talk about things like the other districts out there that have similar selective schools and what their admissions criteria are and how we might adopt the best of those programs to best suit our students and our community. So I'm sorry if I went on a little bit longer, but that would be my rationale for elevating the work of the working group to the task force level. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't want to speak for the working group members, but I believe that each and every one of the working group members has expressed a willingness to continue on in this work. And once again, we appreciate each and every one of you for that. So I want to, now that we're at the point where we're going to ask for a motion for a vote, I did read the motion into the record earlier in the meeting. I want to pause and ask whether the committee would like me to read the motion into the meeting, the vote into the record once again prior to the vote.
Yes.
Okay, I see a couple of heads nodding. Ms. Robinson, Vice Chair. Okay, we'll only take a few more minutes. The first vote, which I'll ask for a motion for in just a moment, is voted in light of the ongoing coronavirus pandemic affecting learning outcomes for all Boston Public School students to suspend certain entrance criteria in the admissions policy for exam schools in the Boston Public Schools for entry during school year 2021 to 2022 only, and to replace those criteria with the following measures as recommended by the exam schools admissions criteria working group and adopted by the superintendent. Further voted that entrance criteria in the admissions policy for the exam schools in the Boston Public Schools for entry in school year 2021 to 2022 only shall be as follows. Number one, any sixth grade student residing in Boston or otherwise served by Boston Public Schools is eligible for admission into the seventh grade in Boston's exam schools in the 2021 to 2022 school year. And I'm sorry, I'm just going to toggle here to a draft to make sure that I have the correct wording. And any eighth grade student residing in Boston or otherwise served by Boston Public Schools who is not already attending a Boston exam school is eligible for admission into the ninth grade in Boston's exam schools in the 2021 to 22 school year. And any eighth grade student residing in Boston or otherwise served by Boston Public Schools is eligible for admission into the John D. O'Brien School of Mathematics and Science in the 2021 to 2022 school year for the 10th grade. And I'm sorry, I said eighth grade earlier. This is ninth graders into 10th grade. So I'm sorry if it's late. My comprehension skills are off. So long as these eligible students meet the following. An average GPA of B or higher in ELA and math for the fall and winter terms of school year 2019-2020, or B, a score of meets or exceeds expectations on the 2019, excuse me, ELA and Math MCAS. I want to pause and make sure that everyone had that correctly. And let me know if I need to read any of that back. Okay. Number 2, the district shall assign 20% of the seats at each exam school based on a straight GPA rank citywide. Number 3, the district shall assign 80% of the seats proportionately by the percentage of school-age children in Boston living in each zip code. The district shall use a GPA straight rank within each zip code, prioritizing zip codes with the lowest median family income with children under 18 first. Homeless students and those in DCF care outside of Boston will be placed in their own zip code, which will be treated as the lowest median family income with children under 18. Further voted to amend the admissions policy for exam schools in the Boston Public Schools by deleting the provision allowing entry in grades 8 and 10 at the Boston Latin School and Boston Latin Academy, and grade 8 at the John D. O'Brien School of Mathematics and Science as approved on December 16, 1992, and by deleting the provision allowing a student to request an assignment to their invited exam school anytime prior to the close of the academic year in which the invitation was issued, also approved in September 16 of 1992. Further provisions in the current admissions policy shall remain in force during school year 2020 through 2021, unless otherwise modified by this order. Do we have a motion to?
So moved.
Second.
You guys are used to this. Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? And for the record, that was a motion by Mr. O'Neill to move this this policy forward, and a second from Ms. Robinson. Ms. Sullivan, will you please call the roll?
Dr. Coleman,
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Dr. Rivera,
Yes.
Ms. Robinson,
Yes.
Mr. Tran,
Yes.
Ms. Oliver Davila,
Yes.
Mr. Lecanto.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan, and thank you to my colleagues. Before we're done, let's get on to the second vote, and then we can talk a little bit more. The second motion for presentation is a resolution on additional exam school recommendations by the working group. This reads as resolved that the chairperson and the members of the school committee of the City of Boston hereby support adoption. Sorry, I have to size up the type here so I can read this. Hereby support the adoption by the district of the following initiatives to expand access to the exam schools. 1, provide appropriate support both before and during the year of entry to exam school admittees who, while academically prepared for exam school content, may require more time to get acclimated to the pace of exam school study, and to secure appropriate funding to support this work. Number 2, to expand the exam school initiative, otherwise known as ESI, beginning as early as 4th grade and running through October of the 6th grade year, focused on academic acceleration in both ELA and math, and to secure appropriate funding to support this work. Further resolved that the chairperson and the members of the school committee of the City of Boston will establish a task force of the school committee that will continue the work initiated by the superintendent's exam school admissions working group, and that will be charged with advising on permanent efforts to expand the exam school applicant pool and exam school admissions criteria for future years. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Hearing none, Ms. Sullivan, will you please call the roll?
Dr. Coleman,
No.
Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Dr. Rivera,
Yes.
Ms. Robinson,
Yes.
Mr. Tran,
Yes.
Ms. Oliver Davila,
Yes.
Mr. Lecanto.
Yes.
That's 6 in favor and 1 opposed. The motion passes.
Mr. Chair, may I make one quick statement on that? I know it is not part of the official vote, but I want to reiterate my support for student voice and the task force that you formulate.
Yes, I think we all want that.
I second that.
Yes, we all do.
Third it,
Fourth.
fourth it, sorry.
We're not to new business yet, folks. Well, I did a big exhale there. And I think we all can take a step back and breathe. And to the families that are affected by this year, again, you might not agree with this decision, but I think you can certainly live with it. And I hope that this decision and this quick decision brings you certainty and direction to the process for your children over the next couple months. I wanted to first start with that.
Yeah.
Second, I want to stop talking, and I'd like to hear from each of you because I think there's many of you that have been in this city much longer than I and might feel the occasion to speak on this moment.
Yeah. Mr. LaConto, I just wanted to say that I know that there's some families that may be disappointed. I think there are other families that may feel they have a moment of hope.
Indeed.
That something that was far out of their reach, now with new awareness and opportunity, may be something that they could begin to consider, so that there won't be a mother over there whispering, "That's not a school for my boy." So I think it's both sides, and I hope that we will come together to understand that there are ways of looking at these issues. And I may be speaking out of turn now, but I know that we have talked in the past about, I mean, we are now in a time of virtual learning. And as we begin to look again at other kinds of new ways of expanding our opportunities for young people, I would hope that at some point we might be able to consider whether or not that we could create a virtual opportunity for students who are not able to physically attend schools, but could still access the Latin school type of curriculum from any school. And if there were physical spaces as time passes that kids could transfer from being a virtual student to an online, to an in-person student, maybe that would be something we could consider that we've never been able to consider before. But I feel like if students want a certain type of curriculum, they shouldn't be denied it by the number of seats that we can provide for them, but we should be looking at other opportunities, whether it's additional courses in other schools, but some way that we can make sure that, you know, students are able to access the kind of curriculum that they so desire.
Thank you so much for pointing that out, Ms. Robinson. And I thank you for, especially for focusing on the families that, you know, have an opportunity here as part of the action that we've taken. It's important to focus on the positive here, and I wanted to make sure that we acknowledge the folks that feel like they are
lost,
you know, experiencing a loss, whether we agree if that's the right term or not. But you're right, and I think, you know, a lot of the talk that we've had over the last couple of weeks has been, how do we implement this? And I think, to your point, there's so many families that have not felt like they've had this access before. We need to get that word out, and that's the focus on implementation that I think the superintendent and her team are going to be focused on as we hit the ground running to implement this plan going forward. So it looks like a couple more members want to speak. We'll go to Dr. Coleman first, and then to Mr. O'Neill and the vice chair.
Well, great. I think this outcome puts a huge pressure on Dr. Celius and her high school redesign team, because, you know, I think we need to, I want to lift up that there's 80% of our secondary student body who are not going to be in these schools because of their capacity. And we have a huge, I think, moral obligation to make sure that their secondary school experience is as engaged, as exciting, and as fruitful as we assume is happening in these exam schools. And so I want to make sure that we're ready to provide the same level amount of time and support and resources to that 80% that we're giving to this 20.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman. Mr. O'Neill.
Yes, Mr. Chair, on what's a pretty important vote for us. I want to again thank the co-chair or the entire working group, Ms. Sullivan, Pastor Acevedo, Mr. Conopasis, our school leaders, etc. Thank you for the work that you did on this. Mr. Chair, I want to thank you for your leadership on this issue, which has evolved, as you said, over time. This was a lot of work to put together the working group in conjunction with the superintendent and to lead the committee through this process, so I thank you. And Superintendent, I want to thank you. You talked about issues like this when you first joined us, when you were first interviewing with us. And you and I have had a lot of quiet conversations that has allowed my viewpoints to mature and grow as well, from your quiet leaning in, as you call it. So I thank you for your leadership on this as well.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Mr. James.
Similar to Mr. O'Neill, I just want to thank the superintendent, her working group, and just everyone for really pushing this to pass the vote tonight. I just think it's extremely critical that we take every opportunity we can to introduce, craft, and pass policy that begins to chip away at the systematic racist barriers that we see in our communities and in society. And I want to also thank those members of the committee who have supported my push and BSAC's push for student voice on the task force. And yes, just an overwhelming thank you.
Thank you, Mr. James. Mr. Tran.
Yes, I'd like to reverberate on what my fellow member Michael O'Neill just mentioned, and I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the working committee that come up with this policy. Absent a perfect policy, I do believe that this policy does address all the major concerns regarding the exam schools. I also would like to express my my appreciation and gratitude to our workhorse kind of a superintendent. I appreciate your work. I appreciate the fact that you put a lot of hours despite all these obstacles that the pandemic had somehow incumbent upon you. I would also like to express my gratitude to my chairman. As I said, stay there and be the chairman for a couple of more years, will you? I do appreciate your leadership. To all members who voted along with me, I appreciate your vocal in addressing your concerns regarding racism and bias. I do share your commitment, and I'm really glad and honored that I've been working with you for the past year or so. Lastly, I'd like to recognize the mayor who put the time and he showed his concern regarding the exam, the inequality of the current admission under the current pandemic situation. And I think he, by showing us his leadership as well as his outspoken regarding this policy, I think he's in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tran. And finally, the Vice Chair.
Thank you. I know it's really late, so I'm sorry to be speaking, but I just think it's such an important moment. And I do want to recognize the leadership of the mayor, because he's worked extremely hard this year on many fronts with the COVID and getting resources to families that most needed, trying to make the best decisions, for the city to keep us safe. And to be here with us tonight and to stand with us. I do want to thank him for his leadership. I also want to thank the chair, because the chair did push very hard on making this happen. I know that people don't know that because they don't get to see all the stuff, behind the scenes. So I do want to appreciate you, Chair. And again, thank the working group and the staff, because they put in a lot of time, and the superintendent. I know the superintendent and I had several conversations, obviously when we interviewed her, she talked about this. And when this, committee was being formed, and, I remember speaking to her, and, and she talked about her integrity and what kind of the decision would be. And I really appreciate that about her, that, she has a lot of integrity and really just understands when we talk about equity, what that means. So I just, again, want to appreciate her. And I do want to echo Dr. Coleman's comments that I'm looking forward to having the conversation about all our high schools and high school redesign. So it cannot just be, about the exam schools. And then I just want to say, I'm a pretty jaded person. People know that. And I'm always looking at what's your angle, all that stuff. So I just want to say that it gave me so much hope, to see so many people come out and support, because this is a journey that we all have to be on. So the journey has to be a look at yourself and your life. How are you living your life? So if you want to go out and protest, and have signs about that we should have, racial justice, social justice, that's a wonderful thing. I encourage that. It's been beautiful to see so many walks of life coming together to do that. But if that's all you're doing, then just please don't come out with your signs, because we need more than just protests. We need people to take a hard look at their lives. How are you living your life? Who are your friends? Where do your kids go to school? Who are their friends? And until we can really start to make some changes, then we're not going to move forward. And so I was really just encouraged and had so much more hope by seeing so many people come out again from different walks who were like, let's take action. So I think we're on this journey together. And I just really want to thank and recognize all those people that came out. And I know that it's, not, we didn't land where everybody wants us to be, but I hope that at some point we'll be able to all look back and see how this decision has positively impacted. And I do, again, want to keep moving forward and not just have it be a year conversation. And lastly, and most importantly, I don't know who Kamani's teachers are, but I hope they give him a pass tomorrow, because it's 2:00 in the morning. I just want to appreciate him because he actually has school. I know we all have work, but we can kind of figure out our schedules. So Kamani, I hope your teachers are listening and they're going to give you a pass tomorrow to sleep late or something, some excuse, something.
I'll have to send an email to Mr. Howland before we go to bed, or maybe Dr. Cassellius can do so. Thank you, Vice Chair, and thank you for the kind words to my fellow members. This is a team effort, and speaking of team, we've been thanking the working group so much. We're almost getting putting it beside the point, the fact that they have so much more work to do now that they've figured out this interim solution. You guys get to fix the whole kit and caboodle going forward now. So I think we've still got at least 6 of you with us. The other 2 or 3, you're smart to go to bed at this point. I want to just take one more moment. There she is, smiling face, Miss Sullivan. I want to take one more moment just to close us out on our business. We did not have any reports tonight, so we're suspending the public comment period on reports. I believe we kind of went through essentially a new business period right now, but if there is any other new business that the committee would like to raise at this time, we can have a brief discussion. So I'll look around for any comment or questions. Mr. James, yes. I already told you get your pass from school tomorrow.
I'm usually up at this time doing homework anyways. So, nothing really that new or different, but I very much appreciate it. I was just going to say that at the last meeting, I believe it was Dr. Coleman who brought up during the new business period about sort of the district's work around getting adequate information about where students live. And I was just wondering if that could be something that we hear about possibly at the next school committee meeting and sort of their work around that. I don't know if Dr. Coleman would like to speak towards that, but yeah.
Thank you, Mr. James. I think we can go back and look at the minutes and try to reconstruct something and ask the superintendent to perhaps incorporate that in her reopening report at the next meeting. I believe the next that was asked in the context of reopening because we were having trouble reaching a number of our students and their families because we didn't have accurate addresses. Is that what your recollection is as well?
Yeah, and to the point of M7s as well, back when I had brought up the point of M7s being mailed.
Of course. Well, thank you, Mr. James, for that. And Superintendent, if you and your team would please make a note. Well, that concludes our business for this evening, 9 hours and 1 minute after we started. That might be a record, at least in my tenure. I know the speakers were this evening, at the very least. The next school committee meeting is going to take place on Wednesday, November 4th at 5 p.m. Here on Zoom. In the meantime, between now and then, we have an election, so please go vote either on November 3rd or before that by voting early or voting by mail. Whatever you do, just do it. And if there's nothing further, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Moved.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman. Second from Ms. Robinson. I assume it's unanimous consent, but as you know, we have to roll out of here on a roll call vote. So Ms. Sullivan, please take it away.
Dr. Coleman,
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Dr. Rivera,
Yes.
Ms. Robinson,
Yes.
Mr. Tran,
Yes.
Ms. Oliver Davila,
Yes.
Mr. Lecanto,
Yes.
unanimous.
Well, thank you once again, Ms. Sullivan, and thank you to all of my colleagues. This has been an incredible night, and just another milestone on the incredible work that we're all doing here for our students and our families in our city. So I thank you for that. I wish you a good night, and I'll see you in a few weeks.
Good night.
Amen.